Hi guys, here we are back again. I was watching my lecture last week on dystocia. It was kind of funny actually. Anyway, this week we're going to talk more about breeding sheep and we're going to talk about artificial insemination and embryo transfer. So I was looking forward to talking about that one. So artificial insemination, as you probably remember from Animal Science 200 or some other class you took, is just utilizing artificial methods to transfer sperm into the female reproductive tract. And just FYI, there are a lot of species that rely 100% or very close to 100% on artificial insemination. Of course, the 100% one is turkeys. And then dairy cattle, I think at this time, are about 90% of dairy cattle are bred using AI. AI is relatively new to the sheep industry, however. So there are tremendous benefits of using artificial insemination. Probably the most important, and some of you who have sheep know this, is you can make great genetic progress because you can breed to the best rams, in the United States. And we typically use AI in the US in the club lamb industry. But if you go to Australia, New Zealand, they use artificial insemination on their commercial large flocks of ewes just because it makes so much progress in terms of quality of the animals. So that is the number one reason for using AI. There are other reasons too. If you use AI, artificial insemination, and you don't have to necessarily have a ram around, at least not around year round. Usually you do have a cleanup buck though to breed your ewes after AI. And there's other advantages like no sexually transmitted diseases can be spread. Um, that's another benefit of using AI. The challenges with sheep and artificial insemination are much greater and different than in beef cattle or dairy cattle. So with sheep, we are still using a laparoscopic method, which basically means it's surgery. We put the sheep to sleep or knock them out, and we have to use a veterinarian or a highly trained technician. It is stressful on the sheep, stressful on the owner too. Today's artificial insemination is quite costly. It usually costs a vet usually or a technician usually charges between $40 and $50 per ewe to put semen in a ewe. And then if you buy the semen, it comes in straws, just like with dairy cattle. A straw could cost you anywhere from $100 if you're buying it from a local producer, all the way up to $1,000. And then you have all the drugs that you use to sink the ewes. So it is not a cheap endeavor, but the genetic progress you make is phenomenal. And then the other problem with AI and sheep is that the conception rate is generally not near as good as it is in other types of livestock that we artificially inseminate. So if we use frozen semen, our conception rate is, I really think it's about 60%. Some people tell you it's 70%. And then if we have a ram, we collect him and then we breed the ewes, then it's about 80%. I was going to say another benefit of using AI is when you use artificial insemination, I should have written this one on here, the lambing dates. I mean, you breed them that day, you know that they're going to lamb in 145 or 147 days. And so all your ewes are going to lamb at the same time, which sounds like a disaster, but it's really good because you can graft lambs that way. You know the day when they're lambing. You don't have to walk out in the pasture and find a dead lamb because you didn't know when she was going to lamb. So that is a big advantage. So to get ewes ready to use artificial insemination, which some of you may be thinking about doing that, um, the ewes need to be in good body condition. We talked about that already, and they need to be vaccinated for CD&T. And I would ask you why. And you would hopefully know that since it's going to be surgery, we're going to be cutting into the ewe's abdomen, creating an anaerobic, site for bacteria to grow. We definitely want to vaccinate them for the T in CD&T, which would be tetanus. So the other thing that we do is we use the CIDRs. The CIDRs are usually put in about 11 days prior to the AI process, but the vet will tell you exactly the number of days. And then we pull the CIDRs after they're in for roughly a week and a half, and then we give PG 600, which causes the ewe to come into heat and hopefully have an egg or two that she's ovulating. And then right prior to AI, we pull the ewes off of feed and water, and that helps them um, it helps them because we put them upside down in a cradle, so they don't have all the pressure of the feed and the water in their abdomen. If it's really hot, the weather's hot, then we'll sometimes leave them on the water. So that's how we get them ready to breed them artificially. And then this one, I have a couple pictures. This blue thing, that's called a cradle, and it lays flat, and that's how we put the sheep in it. Like here, we're putting the sheep in the cradle. We basically strap their legs, both the front and the back legs in, and at this point they are sedated. Different vets, or Tyson Rule uses they do use different drugs to sedate the animal, but in any case, animal, I don't think they can be managed better. They're not so fearful, and so we'll always sedate them. And then when we get ready to AI them, we flip this cradle up, and they're stuck in there because their legs are held. So it is surgery. So they are, you know, I'll show you a picture next. So you can see how it works. What was I going to say? Loading the ewes into a cradle is hard physical work. That's the hardest part of the AI process, I think, is finding a crew that can work for 8 hours lifting those sheep in the cradle, rolling them in the cradle. So here's how we AI the ewe. So basically, there's two different things. This is a laparoscope, and so basically what it is like a tube with a light on the end of it. And so he cuts or punctures a hole inside the ewe just right below her udder. Her udder's right here. You can kind of see. And so here's the light that shines in, so you can see it's dark in there. And then the other thing on this side, he will use carbon dioxide and fill the ewe's abdomen up with CO2, so it puffs it up. So then you can see in there better. And then he's looking for the follicle, and the follicle is like pink. It looks like a little blister on it if she's ovulated. That's the corpus luteum, the CL. And then this one has a syringe, and he injects the semen right into the oviduct, or the fallopian tube. The uterus is down here. So remember we said that makes it so the sperm has to swim much closer distance. The egg is right in here. So that is what is meant by laparoscopic. That's the laparoscope. So after artificial insemination, it takes, literally this process takes 2 minutes. It's very, very fast, especially if the vet or the technician, at school we've done 200, 180 head in a day. That is a long day, but you can do that many. We would rather do 100. So after they're AI'd, they really need to be kept quiet and calm. We don't want to stress them. Keeping them cool kind of simulates that weather that would be more desirable during normal breeding season. And then usually about 2 weeks after AI, you don't want to wait too long, we can put a ram in and see how many ewes mark, and that kind of gives us an idea. The problem with sometimes what happens is the ewes have been artificially brought into estrus, and it's not their normal breeding season, so they won't cycle sometimes, even if you do put a ram in. So you might think, oh, that one didn't mark from the ram, it must be pregnant. And then you have them preg checked after they're bred for 30 days and they're not pregnant. And it's just because they don't always continue to cycle after they're artificially inseminated, because when we AI them, we bring them into heat with using the drugs, the PG600. So then the next thing I wanted to talk to you about is something that has to do with artificial insemination, but it's called embryo transfer. So embryo transfer is where we take a fertile embryo and we flush it out of what's called the donor mom. The donor is the good one. So the donor has the best genetic. It's the best ewe in your flock, and you want to multiply her. So when we use artificial insemination, we can use the best rams, right? When we use embryo transfer, we can use both. But it's relatively expensive. It costs about $1,000 in the sheep world to get a ewe fleshed. It's actually cheaper in cows, I think, because they know how to do it better. It's still relatively new, all this kind of new stuff. So the donor ewe is the best one you have in your flock. And what we want to do is superovulate her. So we give her drugs, I'm going to talk about that in a minute, to get her to produce more than one embryo, right? So normally she'd produce 1 or 2. We can give her hormones and she'll produce multiple embryos. And then we breed her artificially. And we use AI just like I just showed you the picture. So she's been superovulated. We breed her AI, so she has, maybe I had a ewe one time have 10 embryos in her, and that's a lot for sheep. So she has 10 embryos floating around her, and then we flush those out, and they actually do that surgically. In cows, we do it like vaginally, but in sheep, we do it surgically. And we transfer each one, we grade and see those embryos under a microscope, and then we transfer them using the same AI process, but instead of injecting sperm into the reproductive tract, we actually inject an egg or 2 eggs. And so those ewes that get those eggs are called the recip ewes. So they're like the surrogate mothers. They contribute no DNA. What you want in a recip ewe is a big old ewe that has, a lot of body capacity, and she's a really good milker, because all she is the house for the baby lamb to grow in and the food for the baby lamb to nurse when it's born. But the recip puts no DNA. She puts no genetic material because we're putting an embryo in her. So embryo transfer also requires artificial insemination. The benefits of embryo transfer, like I said, is you can maximize the genetic potential of your ewe flock. So you have a really good ewe and you want to make more of her. In her lifetime, a ewe, if she has twins for 5 years, she will produce 10 lambs, right? And of those, half of them will be wethers, which, could be good. Maybe she's producing a new buck lamb. But what you really want to make a good sheep flock is a good ewe flock. So you have to have those great ewes. And so how do you do that? How do you get that ewe to produce more babies than she would in her normal life? Well, we can utilize embryo transfer. So we can get more lambs out of a superior ewe. That is the primary reason for using embryo transfer. So in the cattle industry, we can freeze embryos and we sell them. They sell frozen embryos online. In sheep, they don't do that because freezing embryos in sheep does not work very well. It's in its infancy. It's not really that good. So those recip ewes are important, and they are the ones that are going to be raising those great ewe babies from this ewe. Okay, so what are the disadvantages of embryo transfer? It is quite expensive. So you're paying for AI, you're doing all the syncing for AI, and you're also giving those ewes a lot of drugs. And don't forget that in addition to syncing the ewe that you're going to flush, the donor ewe, you have to sync all the recips. And they have to be ready, their reproductive system has to be ready to accept an embryo. So that is a big deal. And like I said, it's pretty expensive. And then sometimes those ewes that we take their eggs, it's not like they don't have enough eggs. The problem is they have been hit with a lot of hormones, and their reproductive system sometimes isn't there. They may not cycle that year. They may not breed for 1 year. But if you get 10 embryos out of her, she could probably take the year off. So embryo transfer, that's the ewe's ovary and her ovaries here, and this is her oviduct. And so what we're basically doing is we will flush we put fluid in here and we make a little cut and we actually flush the embryos out of her little tiny uterus right here. And they flush them into a little petri dish, and then they look at in the petri dish under a microscope, and they grade the embryos. So it's pretty intense. I remember I got to my job was to hold the petri dish, and all I could think of is, please God, do not let my hand shake. I could just see me spilling the embryos. That would be a disaster. Anyway, so I said most of this here. So you can go back and look at it more if you want. But I'm almost out of time. Oh, goodness sakes, I'm almost out of slides. Alrighty, well, that's embryo transfer and artificial insemination. I hope you guys are having a great week. And I did give you a quiz on dystocia and lambing problems that you probably already saw. Alrighty, take care. See you next week.